Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Kat Kibben. I'm the founder and CEO of threeearsmedia. And today, in the next 30 minutes, I'm going to teach you how to create more inclusive job postings that people actually want to read using AI. We're going to talk a lot of detail. I'm going to share a lot of practical and tactical information in the next 30 minutes. So get your pens ready, prepare to screenshot. And I want to start by actually just telling you a little story that I think illustrates where we're at with AI in a pretty funny way. So I'm going to share my screen. And what you're going to see on that screen when I click share is, drum roll, please. That's me. So I was probably about 4 in this picture. And a few years after this picture was taken, we left my family's farm and we moved into a really beautiful home. And in that home, in the garage space, we had a weight bench. And I was explicitly instructed as a child that I was not supposed to touch the weight bench. If there are any parents on this call right now, go ahead and type yes in the chat because I have a feeling you know exactly where this story is going. So fast forward, I had a few neighborhood friends, and our instruction was just to play outside. Well, we wandered into the garage one day, and of course, the most interesting item in that garage, yeah, you guessed it, it was the weight bench. And they started to pick up the different weights, and I'm sure I was having a panic in my mind, but of course, I was playing along. And as I was walking across the garage carrying a 25-pound weight, which is pretty heavy for a little kid, right? I remember holding it with just the tips of my fingers and kind of walking and balancing it at the same time. And I heard the sound of my mother's voice. And what she said next was, drop it. I followed instructions. Remember, my mother is a military accountant. She's very specific, very strict. And when I heard that voice, I got scared and I dropped it directly on my 5 toes on my right foot. And I broke all of them. I'm telling you that story because every single day, people come to me and ask, is AI going to take my job? And I can't help but think of that story because I think it really illustrates just how well AI is working right now. We put in an input like, write me a job posting, and out it spits something that it already has access to, but it is very much an input output system. And let's face it, if you've dealt with people, if you've been in the hiring business long enough, you know that people just aren't that predictable. You can't code around them and tell them they have to have this and they have to have that. But bigger picture, no matter the role that AI plays in our positions, it fundamentally changes the way that we have to operate in that role. It means we can't be order takers anymore, where the hiring manager is just giving us a list and we're going out and finding it. We really need to function in that consultant role, being able to advise on what best in class means, not just execute all of those tasks in order. But here's what I think is actually going to be much harder than moving to that consultant role, because we've been working on that for a while now, or at least I really hope you have. I think the hardest part is going to be convincing people that we actually care. I want you to type yes in the chat again, all caps, if you remember what it feels like to be a job seeker, what it feels like to open up the internet, type in a job title, and simply hope that something better is going to come along. Because let's face it, we don't look for jobs for fun. We go on Zillow and do a little house hunting in our favorite beach town for fun. We go to Target, get a Starbucks, whatever, right? Like, we enjoy coffee for fun. We do not change our whole lives for fun. And the reality is that in this AI generated world where everyone is trying to go faster, it's really easy to make people just feel like a number. And I can promise you that if they feel like a number on day one, it's going to be 10 times harder to keep that person engaged in the process on day 30 when we're making an offer, on day 100 when they just finished onboarding, on day 300 if you're able to still keep them. We need to have that human in the loop because people need people. when they're making life-altering decisions. And that's what a job search is. At its core, it says, I'm willing to change my whole life. And that's not something to be taken lightly. And that's not something to let the machines take over. And if that's not enough to motivate your focus and energy for this conversation, all right, let's get into the bottom line. If you thought job postings didn't matter, I want you to consider this. Is that the average person making about 65K, if you post a job posting and it doesn't work, it generates the wrong person, they quit within the first 60 days because the post doesn't align for whatever reason, they decide to drop out and you don't fill that role within 30 days. That bad job posting is going to cost you about $28,000. When we leave Rex open, the money starts to pile up behind the scenes. And while it might not be a direct tie to our bottom line, we know that time is money, especially in a world that's moving faster than ever. We've got to figure this out. And that's what I want you to learn by the end of this presentation is how to be that human, how to care, how to show up, but also how to incorporate technology in a way that's going to save your company and you a lot of time and money. So, like I mentioned at the beginning, my name is Kat Kibben, and I am a job post writing expert that really studies the world of inclusive hiring and how to make candidate experiences more inclusive. Every day, I feel so lucky to be able to sit in conversations like this, to provide some insights and research, and also to work with teams one on one to execute training and make sure that everyone on that group has the same definition of good and is able to execute on that consultant level relationship with hiring managers, not just the order taking. And of course, if you have a friend who's a writer, you know what people do to us. Well, can't you just do this for me? We do a little bit of that too. What you'll notice on this screen that's a little bit different than most of the presenters is my personal email address. The reason that is because we're going to have some hard conversations today. We're going to talk about bias. You know, that's our responsibility as humans, is to be the people who step in and mitigate on those hard topics. And that means that you might have a question that you don't want to ask in front of all of your closest friends via the chat. So do not hesitate to shoot me an email. However, if you're feeling brave, please use that chat. I'm pre-recording this session, but I am watching the chat right now to be able to interact with all of you and ask and answer your questions. And of course, at the end, we're going to have a actual Q&A where we can answer all of the questions that come up during the session. If you are scribbling down that email address because you think some of those bias questions might prompt you to have a personal question, don't worry. Email address is here too. There are 3 E's and 3 ears. Our agenda today is to first understand what role I believe job postings play in the future of AI. Why do we need to spend time on this artifact before we can automate all of those other cool things that all of the articles keep telling us we should be able to plug and play with? And then we're going to get really specific and practical. We're not talking high level anything. We're going to go through 4 ways that you can use technology and your brain, never one or the other, okay? We're going to mix tech with the best of the human touch to create more inclusive job postings. And yes, we're going to do it all in 30 minutes with Q&A time. So in the past, I think we could say, you know, maybe the job postings don't matter as much for the candidates that we source, or we're not putting it. And here's the reality, though, is that if we're going to use AI to its true potential, meaning it could impact every single part of the recruitment, hiring, and employee engagement experience, I think we're really missing out if we don't start from the place of accurately defining skills. Let me explain how I'm kind of thinking about this. So, what I'm showing you right now is kind of what could be at the highest level. I know I'm not touching on every single touch point, but what that journey might look like for someone who decides to join your company. And so, my fundamental belief is that if we don't accurately define the skills correctly at the job description phase, all of these other processes are going to be really, really hard because how do you assess a candidate accurately if you've never defined what skills you're looking for? How do you pick the best person out of that? Again, if you have not specifically laid out what this person's going to do every day or those mandatory requirements aligned with the everyday activities. How do you pay correctly if you don't know the role, right? That's a really easy way to start paying your best negotiators instead of paying the talent that can actually do the job. And then we get into the other side where we're having this employee and their lifespan of their career with us, and they're looking for learning and development opportunities. Again, that should be built off of the skills we identified in the first place. Performance reviews. You can remove a lot of bias by actually looking at what we said good was in the first place and their growth. What's the next best role for them? We cannot make all of a programatize, meaning we can't plug in information and have all of that happen if the first data point is messed up. And right now, job postings are this sea of sameness, right? Every job posting looks pretty much exactly the same. And getting that wrong up front, right? Copying and pasting something that we got from ChatGPT isn't going to help people grow their careers. It's going to set bad expectations that ultimately cost you time and money and hurt your ability to be able to scale AI within your company and throughout that entire experience, right? And let's be blunt here. ChatGPT is the same copy and paste we had 5 years ago, just faster. When you ask it to write a marketing manager posting, it's not generating something new for you. It is generating the sum of lots of other parts. And the more distinctions you add, the more this is for this type of role in this area at this level. What we actually see is that we're starting to infuse bias and we're making it harder to stand out. Go ahead, type yes in the chat if you've ever been told we need to stand out. We're going to be best in class. Right. How exactly do you plan to do that by saying and doing the exact same thing every single other person is doing? And by recycling tactics that are over 100 years old that have created bias. See, this is where I think a lot of people don't realize that we're infusing bias when we're using AI in its current state, not removing it. All right. I have researched, written, and explored the world of job postings for the last 6 years. It makes me feel old. But what I have found is that job postings are a direct reflection of what was happening in society. And often they are a counter to whatever the government was doing in order to create more equity. And so, as the government and different legislation rolls out in the United States to create more access to work, what we see is almost a one-to-one influence on job postings where the bar continues to go higher and higher. And unfortunately, as we raise the bar without raising the quality, right? It was just literally created as a wall to keep people out. We've copied and pasted those tactics over and over again without realizing that history and bias behind them. And if we're generating generic job postings, we are infusing bias. And that's why it's more important than ever to teach people how to be part of this conversation. That's why you have to train people on how to use AI and where they have to incorporate their brain in all of this. And so there are 4 areas where I think we can start by training people on their responsibility, but also understanding what AI is really good at. These are the areas where I think human judgment and the output, meaning the AI and being able to edit that and tailor it, I think this is where the most opportunity lies, especially when creating a more inclusive job posting. We're going to start with job titles and understanding how discovery can be influenced by automation. I want to talk about incorporating human language because I can almost trust you. AI is not spitting out anything that you would actually say. We're going to talk about challenging mandatory requirements because that's where bias is coming up the most. And formatting bias, which is where most of the AI is starting right now because it hasn't quite figured out how to tell the truth. I don't think it ever will. That's between you and me. All right. So let's talk about job titles because we know job titles are absolutely critical. Ultimately, because one, people make decisions based on job titles alone. And two, we know that if a job post is not found, doesn't actually matter how good it is. And internally, we have all of these job titles and hierarchy and infrastructure, but you know all that's made up, right? At some point, someone assigned all of these. That does not mean that's what candidates are searching. That's why I created this job title generators, because we know there's a bit of a discrepancy between what candidates call themselves and what we might call them internally. And so, what this tool does, go ahead, get your phones out, open the photo app and put it up in front of that QR code, and it's going to spit out a link for you so that you are able to go test out this job title generator where you're going to enter the skills that person has. What are they going to do every day? Hit enter. And this tool is able to look at all of those skills, look at all of the job postings, and spit out 3 common titles that might reflect that role. Then you're going to take those titles, use your brain, like, does this even make sense first? Then open up Google Trends and do a quick comparison to understand which one gets the most relevant traffic. Google Trends is an amazing tool. Both of these are completely free to help you generate those job titles. Want to incorporate more human language? I think this is the biggest block between recruiters because they don't think they're good writers. You don't think you're a good writer. And I am here to tell you today that if you know what to say, you know what to write. Somewhere along the lines, we told people that it's not professional to just write down what you would say, but that is the most effective way to communicate. Because I can tell you right now, this whole are you passionate about connecting highly talented buzzword bingo stuff is not catching anyone's attention. And it doesn't mean being wildly creative. It means giving them the most important information and simplifying requirements so they can actually understand what you're looking for. It's rewriting the requirements to sound like the way that you might explain them to a stranger. That is what I mean when I say clarity. Okay. That's what I mean when I say human, is that you could walk up to anybody, show them this job posting, and they could say, yes, I want to do this. No, I don't. Yes, I understand what they do. I can't do that. Or yes, I can do that. The easiest way to do that is to use these phrases. You know how to. You've worked in that. Get really, really specific. You feel confident. It's not strong presentation skills. You feel confident presenting in front of a group of 10 or more executives. And the loop that you're going to do after we generate, maybe you do generate or you pull an old job description and you translate it into this language, is that you are going to ensure that every single mandatory requirement aligns with an everyday task, right? If I'm doing this every single day, there's something I have to know in order to be able to do that. And that's where the mandatory requirement comes in. If it does not fit that, if it does not align with an everyday activity, you're probably exaggerating, or we're not including what we would call mandatory requirements, meaning without the help of God, Google, and a really good mentor, you could not figure this out on your own. That's what mandatory means. Doing that audit is absolutely critical because this is where bias comes up the most often when it comes to job postings. And because the most common tactics are biased, we know the AI is going to spit out those biased tactics. And so it's really critical that you, number one, know what those tactics are, but two, you're able to address them with the hiring manager because remember, if the hiring manager doesn't like the posting, if they're not going to approve it, if they feel like you left out something that's really, really critical to them, either we're not posting it or we're creating conflict and you will not have that consultant level relationship with someone who you're like going to war with over a bullet on a job posting. All right. That is not the way to become a trusted consultant. We need to address common biases. So, first, let's talk about what those common biases are. And then I'm going to give you a tactic that I have been teaching teams that is changing their relationship with managers fundamentally. Okay. This is the training everybody needs, because first it's saying this is what bias is. It's when they only want to hire people from competitors. I don't need to explain that one. We all know the manager who is addicted to only having someone from the top three, blah, 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 Google, Facebook, your talent competitors, right? The next one is years of experience. And we know that years of experience quantifies time, but it doesn't qualify people. I mean, you and the person right next to you could have the exact same job title and do wildly different jobs every single day. Years of experience isn't it. It is not the best way to understand authority. College degrees, college is a privilege, not a right. And if you did not learn how to do the job in a college program, you do not need that college degree on your posting, and you need to remove that bias. And finally, the skill keywords. So these are all of your buzzwords that say a lot without saying anything at all. The issue with skill keywords, well, they don't mean the same thing to you that they mean to me, that they mean to the manager. And when we walk into that space of uncertainty, that's where bias lives. And so when those common keywords, when they keep saying the same thing over and over again, they demand 8 years of experience and all of these come up, this is the skill you and your team need. If you learn nothing else today, please pay attention to this, because this is what every single team needs to know how to do. And I'm watching these light bulb moments happen when we're doing team training, and it's asking questions that create contrast to understand bias. So the manager says, we have to have 10 years of experience. Ask, what does someone with 10 years know that someone with only 7 might not? The contrast helps you get the truth, because the manager doesn't actually know what the distinguishing element is if you just asked why 10. But when you create that space between 7 and 10, whatever they say next is often the thing they're actually looking for. Same thing with the college degree. Create that contrast. What did they learn there that they couldn't have learned anywhere else? Whatever they say next is usually verbatim what you're going to write into that posting. And finally, we see formatting bias. That means literally how job postings look can influence how someone feels or if they feel qualified to apply to that role. And there are hundreds of studies on this topic, but let me show you one that I found particularly interesting, that actually came out in the last 10 years. So in this particular study, you do not need to get your glasses out and get your face really close to the camera to read this one, because all what I want you to notice is that the lighter blue is men and the darker blue is women. And there's a difference in every single one of these categories. And the categories are, why didn't you apply? The reason I think this is interesting is because there's a difference across every single one of these, meaning it's very, very obvious that women and men are reading these postings entirely differently. And there are very specific ways that we style and format our postings that can create this outcome. I refer to this as structural bias. It's when we have way too many bullets. The ideal here is about 7 or fewer bullets, 1/3 of the page. When we exceed that, we automatically see fewer female applicants. Excuse me. Next is gendered language. I don't love this one, because all we're doing is swapping out words to try to create some formula. But ultimately, we are targeting a neutral posting. The length of the post itself could be sending people running. Target a posting that's around 250 words. And when I say 250 words, a lot of people panic. I am specifically referring to the part you write. That's not the about us. That's not the EEO statement and all those things you're required to include on your posting. But for you, 250 words. And finally, preferred requirements, we're deleting them. Preferences are for restaurants. You can have cheese on your salad, pepper, whatever, but not for postings, because we don't read preferences the same way. All right. And you can use AI to generate these outcomes. You can use ChatGPT to say, make this shorter, remove bullets, make this gender neutral. Or you can do that part where you say remove preferred requirements, because you're just going to hit that delete. And remember that proofreading matters. No tool can tell you that you spelled the word right. You just didn't use the right word. We're all one F away from being the shit leader. Yes, this is real. Thank you so much for listening to me as we quickly went through those ways that you can use AI to create a more inclusive job posting. And I hope that we can be real friends. I am the only Katrina Kibben in the world. So if you spell my name right, you will find me on LinkedIn or any of these other channels. And of course, if you want to find my book, you can spell my name right over on Amazon. And now I would love to take your questions and hear more from you about what you thought of this presentation, how you're using AI, and if you would like to understand better what makes a good job posting, how to write those 250 words, get your phone out and get this free resource. If you've already gotten our job post ebook before, you should get this one too, because it's been updated with a lot more examples and ideas that you can take from the digital format into your company to create more effective hiring. So, on that note, I would love to take your questions over in the chat. And thank you so much for your time today.